The story begins with an adorable infant named Ju Kyung, whose mother is pushing her down the street. She's a baby girl, yet everyone thinks she's a boy. She's surrounded by other moms who comment that her elder sister is more attractive. As a child, Ju Kyung understands that she isn't pretty based on how others treat her. Her relatives frequently judge her for resembling her mother rather than her handsome father. Therefore, Ju Kyung often compares herself to a character from a horror or cursed story. The scene then shifts to many years later, and Ju Kyung is now in high school. She tries her best to strike up a conversation with her classmates, but they just mock and bully her. So she spends her time listening to rock music and reading horror comics. One day at school, the arrogant leader of the popular kids, Semi, notices her jamming out alone and calls her dumpling. She then orders her to bring lunch for her group, so Ju Kyung hurries outside. While bringing the food, Ju Kyung meets one of the cafeteria workers named Hyun Bin, on whom she has a huge crush. He then takes one of her earbuds and tells her that they have similar music tastes. Ju Kyung is mesmerized by his appearance and finds it difficult to calm herself. She then summons the guts to ask him out for lunch the next day. Meanwhile, the popular kids are wondering where their lunch is and notice Ju Kyung and Hyun Bin from their classroom window. That evening, instead of studying, Ju Kyung works hard in the kitchen preparing cookies, causing her mother to scold her. The next day, while waiting for the school bus, she tells an online support group that she's going to confess to her crush and that she's quite nervous. They are all encouraging and wishing her good luck. Later in class, Ju Kyung accidentally runs across bullies, who then ask her to bring lunch again. After she leaves, the bullies dig through the box, recklessly throwing around the cookies and mocking her for putting so much work into the confession. Later, Semi and her friends then walk to the cafeteria and ask Hyun Bin about his relationship with Ju Kyung. Semi then pretends to be worried because she heard reports about the two of them dating. Hyun Bin, who has a crush on Semi, blames himself for making her feel that way and claims that he is just polite to Ju Kyung out of pity. Sometime later, Ju Kyung presents her gift to Hyun Bin, who is clearly less kind after speaking with Semi. Someone nearby is recording the confession, and Hyun Bin is outraged that she thinks he will actually date her. Just then, the entire bully team appears and rejoices in her suffering while recording everything. While they surround and make fun of her, Ju Kyung asks why they hate her so much. Semi then informs her that it is due to her ugly appearance. Following this, Ju Kyung, who is hurt and embarrassed, cries loudly in the street. Sometime later, she walks inside the nearby building to freshen up, throwing her glasses in a fury as she recalls the cruel comments about her looks. She then heads to the roof of a high-rise building and gazes out at the cityscape. She is about to fall off the roof when she notices a massive image of a dead idol. He died at the age of 18, therefore his fans are paying tribute to him. This upsets her, and she realizes that she does not want to die. Moments later, a guy named Suho arrives and grabs Ju Kyung, dragging her back away from the edge. He advises her to deal with her problems and to remember those who love her. Ju Kyung tries to see his face, but she can't because she doesn't have her glasses on. Since the elevator is broken, she follows him down the steps blindly. She keeps stumbling because she can't see, so Suho ends up piggybacking her down the stairs. When they reach the ground, Suho drags Ju Kyung outside and tosses her into a cab, which is ready to leave. Just before she leaves, she encourages him to cheer up as she notices something bothering him. In a flashback, we see that Suho witnessed a déjà vu and hurried over to help Ju Kyung after seeing visions of someone from his past who died by jumping off a cliff. Sometime later, Ju Kyung returns home to see her mother crying. It turns out that her father lost a lot of money in a shady business and is now heavily in debt. As a result of their financial difficulties, they must now sell the apartment and relocate to their old home. Ju Kyung is informed that she'll be transferred to another school. Instead of being upset, she's overjoyed and relieved that she will no longer have to deal with the bullies. Later in her room, Ju Kyung posts on the online forum that she was rejected because she's unattractive. One commenter then advises conquering this using the power of makeup, and she's linked to a blog post about it. So Ju Kyung spends her savings on a shopping binge and spends her days watching makeup tutorials. She also learns how to shape her brows and works hard day and night to perfect the art of makeup. Days later, the family moves back to their old home, and on the first day of school, Ju-kyung masterfully uses her newly learnt techniques, dramatically altering her look, which even shocks her family. She then arrives at Saebom High School, and everyone compliments her on her good looks and beauty. It's a far different response than she's used to, and this time she's greeted warmly by everyone. Surprisingly, Suho is also from the same school, and he's asked to show Ju-kyung around. While following him, Ju-kyung gets makeup all over his jacket, which he then throws at her in anger. Later, the teacher presents Ju-kyung to the class, who eagerly welcomes her. She then realizes that being attractive affects how people regard her. She instantly becomes friends with two girls named Soo-ah and Soo-jin, who compliment her on her beauty. After school, the girls hang out together, and Ju-kyung is very happy. She later prints out a photograph of her new group and puts it in a photo frame. That evening, Ju-kyung returns to a bookstore named Prince Comics and realizes that the shopkeeper hasn't changed since she was a child. He's glad to see her and tells her that she's still cute. Ju-kyung is also relieved to be back and reaches for the book she wants. But sadly, Suho appears from behind her and takes it before she can. They end up fighting over the book, after which he falls and she lands on top of him. Suho immediately recognizes Ju-kyung without makeup as the girl he met on the rooftop. However, he's upset that she doesn't remember him. Meanwhile, Ju-kyung recalls him from school and is terrified because he saw her without makeup. She then tries to flee, but the bookstore owner offers her a large amount of food to eat. As she sits down and quickly begins eating, Suho tells her to read the book first, then he'll have it. When he questions her about her age and school, she avoids the topic and eventually rushes home. The next day after school, Ju-kyung visits a makeup store to buy some products. However, she suddenly notices the bullies from her previous school walking around. Ju-kyung then recalls all of the cruel things her classmates did to her at that school. She looks at them, but then turns away when Semi looks at her. Semi, on the other hand, doesn't recognize her with all the makeup on. Ju-kyung then exits the makeup store, tears in her eyes. All of a sudden, a bunch of motorcyclists show up on the road. They're driving around the narrow alleyways like madmen. Among them, a guy named Seo-jun is running away from the others. He hides behind a truck and then runs off in the opposite direction. He suddenly comes across Ju-kyung, and instead of hitting her, he lets his bike crash. She checks if he's alright, and he takes off his helmet, swinging his hair around. But just then, the other motorcyclists come back, shouting at Seo-jun to stop. After some chasing, Seo-jun is eventually cornered by those guys. They inform him that they heard he left for abroad, and Seo-jun apologizes for still being around. Then one of the guys punches him in the stomach and accuses him of betrayal for not showing up. Suddenly, a police siren blares out of nowhere, causing the guys to panic and run away. However, it turns out that the siren is actually an alarm Ju-kyung triggered to scare them off. After they leave, Ju-kyung shows up and asks Seo-jun whether he's alright. He notices her school uniform and reads the name of her high school. However, Ju-kyung gets scared and quickly runs away, clutching Seo-jun's helmet in her hand. Meanwhile, Suho is practicing jujitsu when his estranged father approaches him. Suho isn't pleased to see his father and asks why he's here. His father admits he misses him, but Suho is annoyed. This leads to a jujitsu challenge between them. As they fight, memories flash in Suho's mind when his mother needed CPR in the hospital, and his father was drunk with another woman at home. After eventually defeating his father, Suho warns him never to show up like this again. Later, Ju-kyung and Suho bump into each other at the bookstore again. Ju-kyung tries to hide her face, but her attempt fails when she falls off a stool. Suho catches her and teases her for always ending up in his arms. Later, they sit down and she hands him a confidentiality agreement to sign. Suho thinks the agreement is about keeping her suicide attempt secret, while Ju-kyung thinks it's about not disclosing her no-makeup look to anyone at school. While signing it, he comments that it looks like it's taken directly from his favorite comic book, which also happens to be her favorite. Ju-kyung reveals she has the first edition of the Cursed Mask book, which excites Suho. To give him the book, she asks him to buy her noodles, and eventually the two eat together. After the meal, she promises him that she'll give him the book on Monday. On Monday, Joo-kyung folds Suho's jacket, which is now clean. She then puts a thank you note in the cursed mask for not revealing about her real face to anyone. She then places the book and jacket in a bag to give him. Later, a guy drives up to the front of the high school on a motorcycle. He removes his helmet, and it's none other than Seo-jun. It turns out that he's also a student at this school, and he had taken a break to care for his ill mother. Furthermore, it's revealed that Seo-jun and Suho were formerly close friends before an unfortunate incident turned them into sworn enemies. In the classroom, Joo-kyung winks at Suho, and he is confused by her behavior. Later, while Suho is engrossed in a book, Joo-kyung approaches him and invites him to the rooftop, winking again. He looks at her and wonders if she is crazy. However, he gets to the rooftop and questions her why she's pretending they're friends. She then hands him the bag, which he takes out but demands that she stop bothering him. Joo-kyung soon realizes he doesn't recognize her as the girl from the bookstore. Suho rushes away with the bag, but she stops him and tells him that the bag contains sanitary pads. Hearing this, he hastily drops the bag into her hands. Later that evening, Suho gets Joo-kyung's phone number and requests his stuff. He texts her the address and tells her to arrive at 9 a.m. Joo-kyung isn't sure if he's referring to the jacket or the book, so she mulls over how she should look. Feeling unsure, she arrives with a motorcycle helmet on. When she finds out that he wants the book, she hurries to the restroom to wipe off her makeup. Once she hands over the comic book, she takes her leave and heads back home. The following day at school, Joo-kyung arrives wearing makeup and returns Suho's jacket. Meanwhile, Sua's boyfriend surprises her with a romantic celebration for their 100-day anniversary, involving roses, cakes, and music. Amid the celebration, the cake gets all over Joo-kyung's face by accident. She then understands that if she wipes it off, it will reveal her true appearance. Joo-kyung rushes along the corridor, jumping over Seo-jun's back before deciding what to do. Her friends try to clean her up, but she warns them not to touch her. Just then, Suho appears from around the corner. He takes off the jacket she had just given him and wraps it around her. Then he walks away from the crowd with her and takes her to the restroom. After that, Joo-kyung is able to quickly wash her face in the restroom and apply her makeup. She walks outside and thanks Suho for his help, but when he turns around, she realizes that he is Seo-jun. He then demands she give him his helmet back. Startled, she says okay and hastily heads off to class. Later in class, everyone is worried about Joo-kyung. They ask if she's all right and also say sorry for the cake incident. They find it odd that Suho helped her because he never does that for anyone. Joo-kyung starts wondering why Suho did it and if he knows about her bare face. After class, she grabs her brother and they sit on a bench outside. She shares gummies with him and asks what he thinks about her situation. He thinks Suho knows her secret and wants to torture her by using her weakness. For the rest of the day, Joo-kyung struggles to concentrate thinking about this. She continues to imagine Suho as a vampire and believes he will seek his revenge. Later, when she arrives home, she falls on her bed exhausted. But suddenly, Suho calls and asks her to meet him at the comic store. When she arrives, the lights in the store flicker on and off. The owner thinks he needs to change it, so he tells Joo-kyung to keep an eye on the counter while he goes to get the lights. Just then, Suho approaches her and says that there's a girl at the school who looks like her. She tries to dodge his questions and insists she's not the Joo-kyung he knows. He then steps closer, slowly removing her hair tie and taking off her glasses. However, she is exposed when her mother appears at the comic store and shouts out her name. Joo-kyung quickly runs out the door as her mother screams at her to go home and study. Later, we see in a flashback that when Suho walked down the stairs with the bag, he looked inside. He noticed the book and took it out to read a note in which Joo-kyung thanked him for keeping her bare face a secret. He was shocked to learn that, but she soon ran up and took it back from him. At home, Joo-kyung gains courage as she watches her sister playing video games. She realizes not to give in to fear and to face things head-on. The following day, Joo Kyung applies smoky eye makeup and bravely heads to school to confront Suho. When she arrives, she notices him walking across the soccer field. Soon, her confidence shatters, and she begs him not to expose her secret to anyone. She explains that guys like him, who are naturally handsome, can't truly understand the pain of feeling ugly. Eventually, Suho agrees not to reveal her secret, but she must obey his every command. From that point on, he puts her to work, running errands and following his instructions. Later, while rushing through the hallway, she's stopped by Seo-jun, who again demands she return his helmet. That evening, Joo Kyung searches her closet for the helmet, but it's nowhere to be found. She soon learns that her brother has sold it on a resale app. This leads to a fight between Joo Kyung and her brother, during which she accidentally hits her father a few times. Just then, her mother arrives home and puts an end to the chaos. Her mother's punishment is that they must say "I love you" to each other while trimming each other's toenails. Joo Kyung later tells her brother that the helmet belongs to Han Seo-jun. Her brother is immediately anxious and asks why she didn't inform him earlier. Just then, Suho texts her, asking her to bring him a book from the bookstore. Rushing to the comic store, she realizes that a kid has gotten a hold of the book. She somehow manages to convince the boy to give the book by feeding him ice cream and dancing for him. She then rushes to the playground and hands the book to Suho. Suho expects that she will stay, but immediately runs away from there after that. The following day, Joo Kyung writes Seo-jun a letter in which she advises him to work on his patience and informs him that her brother sold the helmet on a resale app. However, she assures him that she will get it back in a few days. Meanwhile, Seo-jun's friends misinterpret the note as a love letter and start teasing him about it, which he clearly enjoys. Later, Joo Kyung gets invited to the rooftop by Suho for a meal. Fed up with his constant orders, she requests one final task to clear her debt. He surprises her by telling her to participate in the school talent show. Later, Joo Kyung tries to sing a song, but she's so awful that the other students make fun of her. So, instead of singing, Joo Kyung shows up and starts dancing on stage. It's a traditional K-pop dance that is a bit inappropriate for school. However, after the dance, she realizes she's not on the talent show stage, but in a teacher's meeting. Embarrassed, she apologizes and quickly leaves, while the principal scolds the teachers for the chaos caused. That evening, Seo-jun goes to the hospital to see his mother, bringing her flowers. They have a cheerful chat, and his mother tells him that she's glad to see him in his school uniform again. She then advises him to go home and rest and to avoid riding his bike because it's risky. Seo-jun smiles and reassures her that she doesn't need to worry. Meanwhile, Joo Kyung gets a text from Suho asking to meet at the playground with a book. She then heads off to see him, but bumps into a group of kids on the way. They're a bit drunk and they bully her about her looks. Joo Kyung is distraught and arrives to see Sohoo while crying. After that, she hands him the book and warns him not to play with her feelings. She believes he's no different from the bullies she faced in previous schools. Feeling horrible, Suho wraps her in his jacket and eventually helps her in stitching up her leg wound. Unknown to them, Seo-jun accidentally shows up and notices them together. The following day at school, Seo-jun confronts Suho during lunch and asks him if he's happy after killing his friend. He then tosses away Suho's plate on the floor and goes over to Joo Kyung. He sits beside her and tries to flirt with her while everyone looks in shock. Seeing this, Sohoo gets angry and he grabs Seo-jun by the collar as the episode comes to an end.